Are you making this mistake with your data? I keep on seeing this time and time again. People are coming online, making posts saying, hey, I'm doing ETL in Power BI. But that is not the case, and let me tell you why. I keep on seeing people time and time again, rely on Power BI for ETL processes, and it works fine until it doesn't. What they're really doing is ETV, extract, transform, and visualize. And that's fine until you have to scale to something larger that Power BI just cannot manage on its own. Or until you get that $100,000 Azure bill because your Fabric compute has absolutely skyrocketed from refreshes. So I'm going to show you how to fix this using Medallion Architecture and true data engineering work. It starts out innocently enough. You create a Power BI report. People love your visuals. They think that you are Merlin and you have just been the wizard that absolutely destroyed Morgana. And all of a sudden, things start to break down. Reports start to crawl. Your compute usage starts to increase. Those Azure bills start to come in. And people begin to question why your numbers and their numbers don't quite match anymore. You're constantly struggling with things like security and managing data access. If this sounds familiar, that is the ETV trap that you've fallen into. And next, we're going to talk about why this happens and how you can avoid it. All right, so Power BI was never built to be an ETL tool. It's not a data engineering tool. Power BI is a visualization tool, and it should be used for that. It is amazing for that purpose. When you start to build in all these complex transforms, it really starts to slow things down and things start to crank and crank and crank. And all of a sudden you have users that are just sitting there waiting for an hourglass to spin and they stop using your reports. So, ETV, the extract, transform, and visualize works great for quick insights, for prototypes of reports, for insights that you need instantly that you don't have time to wait on a data engineering team to fully, develop. But again, just like we talked a moment ago, reports start to slow down. Because those transformations are happening all within that Power BI system, and it's not meant for that. It's really it's not a proper data pipeline. So data governance becomes impossible to enforce when you're doing things this way. Things like row level security, you just can't effectively manage in Power BI alone, especially when you start to have multiple self-service Power BI reports. It's not meant to manage all of that. The fix is going to be, really implementing Medallion Architecture. So if you don't know what Medallion Architecture is, be sure to check out our previous video. I'm going to go over it really briefly, but we do have a video that fully goes through this in more depth. So Medallion Architecture is a 3-layer system, basically. You have your bronze layer, your silver layer, and your gold layer. Your bronze layer is your raw data, the data that's coming directly from your other source systems, your vendors, your Excel files that are out there on SharePoint that you need to ingest because that's how somebody's tracking something. That's your raw data. Your raw data is coming in, being dumped into something like an S3 bucket or an ADLS container. And so from there, that data gets processed and cleaned, and you have systems and processes in place to ensure that data is whole, accurate, and looks pretty, right? You don't have some weird characters somewhere. You have cleaned up dates so that they're all consistent. You have removed any records that don't belong, that may have been duplicated. So, again, your silver layer, it's your cleansed and transformed data. And then you have your gold layer data, What is your gold layer data? Well, is the data that's really optimized for reporting. It is your, to kind of picture it as your data showroom. It's that vehicle showroom where you walk into the Ford dealership and you see that beautiful Cobra sitting there that you just want to reach out and jump into and drive off in. So that is your gold layer of data. So that, having those systems in place, doing the ETL to get the data into those layers before you layer Power BI on top of it to do the visualizations is the right way to do things. One real world example is, I recently worked with a client that was really struggling under the weight of doing doing ETV instead of ETL or ELT. They kind of had, ETV gone wild. It was a little too much, right? Their Power BI reports really had become a crutch for their business, and maintenance just became too much. It was impossible. It was, reports were taking sometimes hours upon hours to refresh each day, and then they were only able to refresh them once a day. So we helped to transition them into that Medallion architecture we just got finished talking about. And all of a sudden, their Azure Fabric bills started to come down. They, clearly were designating and separating, their raw data from their refined data from that gold level kind of curated data that we were talking about. And the results from this were that reports went from taking hours to refreshing in minutes. And they were able to refresh some of those reports that they needed more often, multiple times a day. Data quality issues dropped nearly 70%, which is absolutely amazing. And then we have, analysts that stopped having to go out and do all this firefighting because reports that they were putting out didn't match, data that people were pulling, and it was this time delay that we're doing. Everything as ETV is just not maintainable, especially as things start to scale. So I want to hear from you. Tell me, are you using Power BI right now to do all of that work? Or are you doing some type of ETL or ELT process and have some data engineers in place? Let me know. Let me know if it helped when you moved maybe from an ETV type architecture to a more traditional ETL ELT type of architecture. Let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to hear from you. And as always, be sure to join us on Friday nights at 10 p.m. for our live sessions. I'll talk to you again soon.